first of all, thank you for still being here. It's had a long day. Not as long as yesterday, but still pretty long, so I'm not sure when it's doing this. Give me a second.
No, it's fine. Excellent.
You're going to have to reinstall this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, so thank you. As Sebastian said, I will be talking about self-narratives and narrative design of the self. I'll explain as we go along. First of all, a bit about me. My name is Johnathan Harrington. I normally do language stuff and linguistics and digital games. It's my major interest. I also like post-structuralism. I like to think I know something about building with array as well, but I really don't, like nobody. I also make games. I like to make games about how they shouldn't be anthropocentric, but they still end up being. Those you can find on my itch page. I also make educational games sometimes, which are somewhere on the internet. I don't feel too strongly about those. So, as I said, our topic today is going to be graphical design. I'm going to be reading and looking at the same time, sorry if it annoys any of you. So, in this paper, I aim to look at how personal game design can contribute to constructions of the self. I hope to show how making game narratives can in turn help shape a personal narrative. This shall be done by looking at a selection of games in order to argue in which ways this personal narrative could be developed. This should not only help contribute to discussions presented on hermeneutics of the self presented in previous conference proceedings, such as last year we had Paolo Pedercini, for example, but also contribute to games and self as a whole. By the end of this paper, I should have at least begun to scratch the surface of how autobiographical games help their designers form their personal narratives within Recur, who I will explain. How this totally differs from and agrees with previous work on autobiography in digital game design. I'll be using Stefan Gualeni more specifically. And finally, whether it helps other personal narratives to grow. So, first of all, Recur. The topic of self-narrative design will be approached by looking at Paul Ricoeur's theory of narrative identity. Ricoeur argues that life itself is a cloak woven of stories told. I really like the quote. The perceptions of ourselves is dictated through the narratives that we build around ourselves. As Dan Zahavi explains, this puts Ricoeur in contrast to other concepts of self, as it helps us consider how identity can change. Not only is it not located objectively, but it is also opening itself to constantly changing subjective readings that we ourselves have to recite and perform. Ricoeur creates a distinction through Edom and Dipset. Edom is the identity which remains as a constant, despite the mutability of everything else around it. It is what keeps Theseus' ship as his own when the stern is changed. It is how externally we can note our identity as our own, as opposed to someone else's. Meanwhile, Ipse is closer to the concept of selfhood, with that which we cannot often express, but realize is perennially not only ours, but as us. We can locate the concept of Ipse and Dipseti in phenomenological work, such as Sartre or Merleau-Ponty, precisely because it is subject to our personal phenomenological experiences. It is in flux with our being. When discussing identity, Ricoeur argues that both are necessary and a part of how identity has been constructed through the ages. We cannot discuss Ipse alone, mostly because cementing the self in writing or film, or in this case game making, requires cementing of our identity's whatness, at least so that we can discuss it. However, we also cannot discuss Edom alone, because that will be ignoring our own positionality within our identity. This is what we are leading to when we speak of a narrative identity. Identity is formed through this interplay between the Edom and the Ipse, between the objective identity that remains and the stories of the selves that we and others tell about it. Within games, these narratives can be constructed through gameplay. The negotiation of our place, negotiation of our place within games can be a construction of one of the many linens within our life's cloth, especially if there is a self-ascribed designation of identity, such as character creation. However, while it is acknowledged that there is still much to be gained by looking at narratives of self through the remediation of play in this paper, I hope to look specifically at the potential self-construction within the process of making games. I aim to do this by mostly actively looking at intentional makings of the self, such as through autobiographical games, actually specifically through autobiographical games. However, I will also show how non-autobiographical self-narratives, or rather semi-autobiographical as I will explain later, can still be relevant to look at in terms of Ricoeurian identity philosophy, as they establish an identity through an othering process, which others can share and appropriate. Perfect. Oh, that was the... No, we're starting with this one now. Okay, so I would argue that making an identity within a pre-made digital game, such as character creation in Skyrim, first one, as opposed to designing yourself with a personal vertical work, is different in at least one very important way. For example, last time I played Skyrim, I made a female dumber with a bald head and a scar across her face. The story I told of myself, using this avatar, served as a method to extend my selfhood into something that it is not, in order to help me better understand what my identity is. Some of it is clear. Defining myself as a female served as a way of negotiating my maleness through othering. By playing something I am not, I can construct a narrative identity that helps me discuss what I believe I am, a male. It is individual, as any form of extension of selfhood within Skyrim is based solely on my play. However, it is separate, as the limits of these extensions are not defined by me. For example, querying my gender beyond the normative 2 would not be possible. This has been already explicated by the unknown designer, or the many designers in Skyrim's case. On the other hand, in autobiographical game design and subsequent interaction, the renegotiation of the ipse becomes communal and yet personal. Let us, for example, consider Sibel by Nina Freeman. In this game, players get to relive Freeman's relationship, which she formed with another individual through an MMORPG, a massive multiplayer online role-playing game. Freeman herself, through both the design and the gameplay, gets to play, and play with, something that is both herself, as it is her personal story, but also separate from herself, as it is now made object within the game's events. Freeman can both play herself, retelling her story, and solidifying her personal narrative identity, but also play what she was, developing her non-game located ipse by considering her past. Additionally, other players can also get to play the past Freeman, sharing and developing further her personal story, not through renegotiating the narrative, as the narrative is currently hers, but rather through further illustrating what the narrative is not. They can help demonstrate what the liminality of Freeman's positionality within her own design is. A relationship that Freeman can share with her players. For Freeman, it is both communal and personal, as while Sibel's narrative is delineated by what Freeman wants it to be, that will be the personal part, this delineation is highlighted and shared by everyone who partakes in her individual journey, as even their contributions to the game can help her further form her personal identity. Previous work about autobiography within digital games has touched on some of these points we just listed. For example, Guarini discusses something similar in terms of Foucaultian freedom. He argues that freedom within Foucault's work can be conceived, can be conceived not only as an act of rebellion against oppression, but also as a way of projecting a moral self in relation to power structures around us. Foucault draws examples from ancient Greece's practice of ethics, which he argues was not based on how one can act as a moral subject, but rather based on how one can be the subject they wish. Ethical living was performed in relation to what they wanted to be, rather than what they ought to be. They self-designed themselves to shape society around them. In a similar way, he argues that that the methods and practices of self-design could be looked at in terms of Foucault's technologies of the self, which Foucault defines as techniques which are here actually, permit individuals to effect, alone or with the help of others, a certain number of operations on their own bodies and souls, thoughts, conducts, and way of being, so as to transform themselves. Guarini, through Foucault, argues that an awareness of the institutions of power around us allows us to free ourselves with exercises of self-design, whether this means designing the self or designing for ourselves. He links his thought to earlier point in the same paper, where he discusses game design as a transformative practice, which, as the name implies, is the idea that game design can help transform people in different ways. So, there is a clear difference in philosophical focus between Foucault and Ricoeur, at least from my readings. While Foucault works more often with a larger picture in terms of where we fit within the structure, with the capital S, so to speak, Ricoeur is more deeply vested within the personal and how we shape an identity in relation to the other and others. However, looking back to our work, there is still some similarity between narrative identity in the autobiographical and the concept of freedom from power through technologies of the self. For example, in Cybele, we can make the argument that Nina Freeman is projecting a moral self that is not deeply bound by sexual norms instituted by power. By fashioning a self that acknowledges these power boundaries, she frees herself from them. Within what we have earlier discussed, we could similarly state that the personal narrative is bound in a way that allows for renegotiation of not only Freeman's sexual norms, but societies at large. However, I would differ from Guareni and perhaps Foucault in the terms of necessity of acknowledgement. Guareni stated that for the practice to be liberatory, one must first recognize the constraints imposed by power, which I find myself disagreeing with. This might have been the case for previous technologies of the self, but I would argue that autobiographical game design is different from other types of game design due to the communal aspect of narrative identity. When explicitly designing a self, there is already the limitation set by your ipsa, what you perceive yourself to be. Anything that you do not consider to be you will not be designed as you. The design of the self explicates where you belong within the structures of power. Hoping to make the last part a bit clearer, it is hard to set yourself free from the power institution of sexual norms, for example, if you find yourself fully ascribing to every sexual norm. Realizing your position is not only potentially harder, since you might have defaulted within these norms, or chosen to be there, but also not deeply relevant, since pushing towards freedom from power, when you are part of the power, is perhaps slightly paradoxical in some sense. I feel a bit fast. Okay. So, since you do not need to choose your positionality within the power structures, you do not necessarily need to consider what power institution you are setting yourself free from. Realizing how you can be free will make redefining your narrative identity easier. However, the practice of self-design as a transformative practice can still be liberatory through how others interact with it, through the communal formation of a narrative identity. Even if you do not realize the edges of liberation that you have set, players can realize these for you. I would even go further and argue that if you realize in which way you are renegotiating power structures, there is still something to be gained from the communal renegotiation. Foucault hints at this necessity, as we can see in the earlier quote, when he states, alone or with the help of others. So perhaps this is a point of re-entry. Communal renegotiation of an ipsa can help legitimize a particular change in a person's narrative identity through a confirmation of result. Additionally, the deeply personalized boundaries laid forth within an autobiographical game can help others struggling with their own narrative identity to further understand their own ipsa through their shared experience. For example, right, that goes there. Let's consider Anatropy's personal journey of her transsexual transition in Dysphoria. As a brief explanation of anyone who hasn't played this game, Dysphoria is a game where you don't even control an avatar, but rather pass through Anatropy's personal journey from her transition from male to female by doing these little mini-games that allow you to at least feel a bit better what she was feeling. So, on one hand, there is the clash between a preordained self and an emergent self, as Anthropy deals with her male to female transition. She is playing with her ipsa by detailing a time when her ipsa was in major flux. However, through her personal narrative being reified, Anthropy also allows for a social legitimization of her personal narrative, which might in turn help further affirm her identity. As her identity is socially contested, placing her in a position of otherness, the existence of a narrative that affirms her identity might help take her out of her positionality as other. Oh, really? I thought I was with. That makes sense, but either way, I'm soon finished. The existence of a thing that outlines Anthropy's phenomenological hermeneutic process allows others to know that they can construct a self-narrative that they might not have perceived as possible or otherwise legitimate. While Anthropy acknowledged the power institution that she was setting herself free from, that of gender normativity, the sharing of the story and further experience terms normalize this outside of power structure, legitimizing the narrative identity that she's trying to set for herself, as well as the narrative identity that others have been struggling to create. This will allow us to go into one final question in terms of recur, which is Sam Barlow's Her Story, which really was the reason why I started writing this paper. Her Story, for anyone who didn't play it, is a game where you play as a female protagonist or protagonists, which are either twins or a multiple personality disorder. And she is being accused of a crime, which she denies by saying it's another person, so to speak. Kind of spoiler alert, sorry. Now, this allows for this final application of recur. And this will be more of a question for everyone than an answer for myself, because I'm not quite sure myself. Sam Barlow's Her Story is not an autobiographical story. He is not the Hannah, I think her name was. However, it does deal with the very principal protagonist, Hannah Smith. It was Hannah. A woman who is being investigated in relation to a crime, who has traits of identity that are often othered, such as mental health. Through Anthropy's dysphoria, this paper has shown how the reification of a personal narrative might be beneficial beyond Anthropy's self and into other selves that might have needed a thing to kickstart a personal hermeneutic process. The final question posed by this paper becomes, where does her story place itself within this recurring narrative identity? Despite not being explicitly acknowledgeable as a self-narrative in the same vein as autobiographical games, is it possible to state that Barlow's work still belies a positionality and in turn at least a fragment of narrative identity? So, basically, to further explicate on this, can we make the argument that through Sam Barlow's personal experiences with mental health, he could put this within another narrative identity that he is working with within her story, while he never passed from multiple personality disorder. He did state in interviews that he has mental health issues that he dealt with. So, we're very exactly. Additionally, if it does, is this identity ingrained in a self enough to be shared and appropriated by other selves passing through this, such as through mental health, that are looking for verification of an identity that they cannot fully perceive? Thank you.
I'm a faulty system full of glitches. Thanks, Johnathan, for that talk. Questions? Okay, maybe then I will have to start with the question, or do you want to start, Stefano? I'll say that.
Hi, and thank you very much. It was very informative, very interesting, but also very fast. So I would like to ask you to clarify. There's a point of disagreement between you and me, apparently, concerning the relationship with power when one deals with an autobiographical work. Can you explain how you understood power as coming from within in that sense? Because it was not...
No, I wouldn't make the argument that power comes from within, but rather in the same way that Foucault argues that the designation of power in ancient Greece was through the movement of projecting themselves to be the sort of society they want, and by that creating power. It will be a similar way within game design, as you're designing a self that deals with certain norms of power. You could be trying to push for a society that works within these frameworks that you helped design. That is also the point I try to make with Anthropy's legitimization of her transsexual issues, through a creating of a personal identity that can be played and played with as well at the same time. There's a process of legitimization of the issues she's passing with that legitimize her narrative identity, but also allow others who do not have this narrative identity, or rather who have this a similar narrative identity that hasn't been legitimized, to appropriate and share this with her to legitimize their position as well.
Right, and maybe we can talk later, but it seems to me that it's still a matter of regulating and shaping oneself in relation to heteronormativity in this case. So it seems to be still a struggle with the structure of power, whether it's a material or not immaterial.
Definitely, I still agree that there's a fight with the structures of power. My contention was more than anything in regards to whether you need to acknowledge that you are contesting the structure of power. I don't think that's particularly necessary.
Thanks.
Next. Peter.
Thank you. I was just wondering, the conversation that we had yesterday regarding the distinction between sympathy and empathy when it comes to games that purport to give the player an experience that wouldn't be located in their own identity, be it a different ethnicity or a different species, I think were the examples yesterday.
I'm going to precede that by saying I probably was not here.
Okay,
Very left
cool.
with reception. So,
Well,
please tell me about it.
I probably won't remember that correctly, but I think we're talking about, it was like a game that teaches you to see like a bat, and then a game that changes your ethnicity, and whether or not we're talking about communicating empathy or simply endowing the player with a degree of sympathy. And the communication of an autobiography sort of, generally implies the author imparting, the author recording their own experience to themselves and then imparting that to an audience. It's difficult if you weren't there. So all I was going to say is, how do you position the function of autobiography within the affordances of a game in relationship to what we were discussing yesterday about the problem of whether or not we can expect empathy rather than just sort of engender a form of sympathy?
I'm going to go off what I normally conceive of sympathy and empathy to be. I wasn't here, so I would generally consider sympathy to be to acknowledge somebody's position, but should not be able to completely click with that sort of situation, while empathy would be, for me at least, to have a shared understanding through either through personal experiences, or rather through a connection formed in some way or another. At least that's how I understand them. On one hand, like if we're looking at just the narrative identity of the autobiographical game maker, I would argue that sympathy would already be enough. Not even sympathy, but an understanding. Because as soon as somebody understands the self that you are trying to portray, there is already an element of legitimization put there already. They understood it, your story has been cemented somewhere, so at least in one mind it has been made legitimate. If this didn't click in any way whatsoever, then this legitimization process will not be there. Empathy would perhaps be necessary as soon as we go into an appropriation of a narrative identity. So for example, I argued that in Anatropy's game, the narrative identity can be appropriated by other people passing through a male-to-female transition to further legitimize also their position within society. In that case, they would necessitate having empathy towards Anatropy because it's a social situation that they share. Does that kind of answer it?
Yeah.
We can talk about more. Yes.
Okay, then I'll answer for now. I'm going to ask a question. So you're making the authorial position very strong in that regard, it seems, right? So the games you're talking about are very, you could probably call them like author games, maybe, perhaps. So I was wondering, I have several questions in that regard. First, what happens with, so there are people saying that games are processes. That means they change over time and you do things with them and then they somehow become something different. Might that affect your argument and in which way?
That's actually pretty interesting. First I was going to use a different game, Alex Camilleri's Memoir on Code, where after personal events had passed in his life, he put out a new update of his game called Reissue. And this would be very interesting in terms of the renegotiation of the IPSA because he's done two onticizations, so to speak, of this IPSA to reconsider his narrative identity. So it's also a matter of personal growth for him. He's really acknowledging it in this way as a way of him growing and considering where he is now and where he was before. So I guess that does it answer it? Okay.
we would have time for probably 2 questions. Daniel. Daniel.
Yeah, thanks for that. So you're focusing on both in the example of Skyrim and in the autobiographical game that you've mentioned. You're focusing on character creation outside the actual process of playing. I guess it kind of flows on from Sebastian's question in a way. Now, when Ricoeur talks about identity and narrative identity especially, he is talking about the temporal dimension of identity. How do we develop an identity over time? How does identity come to emerge as the answer to the question of who am I with respect to all the different actions which I take and the practices I engage in and so on. So I was wondering if you have anything to say about that aspect of self-creation within a game, right? Self-creation through playing the game rather than through actually determining the character prior to the act of playing the game.
Definitely, and I think that's where I would feel that games like Skyrim would not work perfectly with in terms of Ricoeur, because you do it and you're done. But in terms of, perhaps you disagree, but I was defer to you in that regard. But I think it will work better in terms of autobiographical games, because the narrative identity is being consistently formed through the communal aspect. As people are playing this game, they are pushing the liminality of what you consider yourself to be. So if you consider yourself in terms of, or rather, if you didn't even consider yourselves in terms of your gender identity, having people that play this game outside of your ascribed gender identity would help push forward or push outwards of this liminality that you perhaps did not consider. So your narrative identity would be growing through the communal aspect of it. The personal part would be where you create it and put it out there for people to push, but it is necessary for people to push this liminal space of yourself to further form how your narrative identity is growing.
Thank you. What I was thinking about is, you were talking about Stefano's transformative process. How do you think the design process in an autobiographical game transforms the designer? Specifically that process and not the after effects of it being played by a community. Because it's a unique situation. I'm not sure whether you covered it, I might have missed it, but I was wondering. It's a very speculative question.
No, of course. One second. No, it's not here. Anyway, I would argue that at least this would perhaps work better within Stefano's framework than mine. When you're designing yourself within a game, it would be interesting in terms of you considering yourself in relation to the power structures. So if you're considering yourself within these power structures, in a certain way you can transform yourself by realizing at what point you are in. So for example, if I may give an example, as you know, we made health games for our master's degree course in different years, and we would say that we transformed ourselves through making of these games by consciously and subconsciously considering our positionality within the realm of healthy eating. So that would be one way of doing it. Of course, this can be done in more productive ways. I don't think there's a structure of power around healthy eating. Maybe there is, but not something I deeply care about. But on the other hand, within more deeply problematic things, like, I don't know, economic structures, for example, this could also be considered by designing a self that considers their positionality within these and their rampant consumerism, for example.
I think in the interest of time, let's give a hand to Johnathan. Thank you. So the final speaker for today will be Joseph.